Warping audio is one of Live's strengths, and it's especially useful preparing files that are going to be used as part of a live performance. Let's take a look at some of the issues involved in this process. So I've got a live set here, and I've already imported 2 clips here that are actually full songs. As you might remember, we can just navigate through one of the browsers and drag and drop the files onto the tracks. So I'm going to start off with this song on the first track, and it's currently visible down here in the clip view. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is going to lock to tempo. Now, when I look at the segment BPM marking here, it tells me that the song or the file that we're looking at is originally at 117 BPM, and the actual tempo in the session is slightly different right now. And I want to make sure that this song lines up rhythmically. And one of the reasons that we do that is so that if I'm using any effects that are time-based, that they'll actually work in time with the music. And if I want to switch to any of the clips within this set, I also want the rhythmic transition to be seamless. So to do that, we actually need to dial in a little bit and set up our warp markers and make sure that things are lining up. So if I take a look at the beginning part of this song, and I'm just here in the beat time ruler and I'm dragging up or down, we'll notice that it looks like the first warp marker by default has been placed here, and there's actually some audio out in front of that. So I'm going to move that first warp marker by holding down my Command and Shift keys. And when I do it that way, the warp marker actually stays in the same place, but you'll see that the underlying audio is actually moving. And I'm going to line that up with what looks like that first transient right there. Now, before I start kind of lining up the interior parts of the song, one of the things that you want to do is go over to the very end and find kind of the last transient or the last rhythmic hit that you can find where you can lock that down. And that way, as we start working with the stuff that's in the middle of the file, we've kind of got the outside edges pinned so that they don't move. So I'm going to come over here to the end of this, and again, I'm just clicking in the beat time ruler and dragging up and down to zoom in and dragging right and left to move over to the end of the file. And so one of these last 2 items ought to be something that I can depend upon placing. So I'm going to back up just a little bit, and I'm going to hold my Shift key down, which will allow me to temporarily play it from a starting point that's closer to where we're at. And I notice that that hit right there is actually a snare hit. And since snare hits usually happen on 2 and 4, and I'm right here by beat 4 here in bar 72, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this transient marker into a warp marker by double-clicking on the pseudo warp marker. And now I can just click and drag that and snap that onto bar 72. Now, as I did that, you can start to see that some of these other things are starting to line up and make more sense. That doesn't mean that it's going to be that way throughout, but that at least tells me that we're getting a good start. At this point, what I want to do is work my way through the song kind of phrase by phrase and make sure that I'm still lining up. So looking at the waveform, I can see that something different starts to happen here around bar 9, and then around bar 13, and at bar 29 and 33, and so on and so forth. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a closer look right here around bar 9 and see what's going on and see if things are lining up. And as I look there, I can see that it looks like that's a little bit off. So I'm going to dial in a little deeper there. Look at where that transient marker is, and that looks like it's in an okay place. So I'm going to turn that into a warp marker, and I'm going to snap that over to bar 9. Now, one of the things that I can do from here to try and make everything in between bar 9 and bar 72, where I put the other warp marker, is to right-click and choose one of the warp from commands. And the 2 that I like to use are warp from here and warp from here straight. So warp from here just means that it's only going to warp to the right of the warp marker that I right-click to start this process. The difference between that and warp from here straight is that when you choose warp from here straight, you're telling Live that you think that the tempo to the right of that warp marker is consistent. It's the same tempo. So I'm going to choose that one. And we saw that that makes some subtle changes in the alignment. And now as I look over here to the right, I can continue to look, and that's looking pretty good. Now, one way you can check this is to turn on your metronome and start playing the track from the point where you drop that warp marker, you've done some work, and listen to see how the click is lining up with the rest of the track there. So let me shift click over here about bar 8, Okay, so that's starting to line up pretty well. One of the things that you're going to want to do is make sure that you're using the correct warp mode as you do this. Now, as I was playing and listening to that, I was hearing a little bit of wobbling in the audio file. And the reason that's happening is because I'm currently using Beats warp mode, which is good for transients that are related to percussion or drum elements. And so I want to click on the warp mode drop-down menu, and I want to choose something different. Now, Complex and Complex Pro are designed to work with long files like we're working here. So I'm going to use Pro, and I'm going to play that again and just give that a listen and make sure that that's sounding better. So shift clicking here around bar 8, and I'll start playback there. And that's especially apparent there in the bass part of that file. That's much, much smoother at this point. So again, I'm going to continue to check around points where there are divisions in the form. So the next place I would look is right here. It looks like bar 11 is looking good. Let me go over here to bar 13. It looks like that's maybe where the verse starts. And as I look at that, boy, that's lining up pretty nicely. And I'll come over here to bar 29 next. Yeah, and if I look at the right side of the stereo file, that looks like that's lining up pretty well. And again, I can just back up a little bit and play the track and just make sure that the click is still aligning with the music. Okay, it sounds pretty good. So as you work through a file doing this, you're going to want to make sure that you work slowly and carefully, moving from left to right. And that way, you can consistently keep things in line with the tempo. Another thing that you're going to want to do as you prepare these files for use is determine what key they're in. So I've also set up this track in the session here with a simple keyboard sound on it. Let me play that. So I got a little bit of a Rhodes sound going on there, and I've chosen one that doesn't have any vibrato or anything like that. And I'm going to give that a listen as I play this track because I want to determine what key this is in. So as I was doing that, I played a chromatic scale, and I'm just listening for notes that sound like they are the kind of center of the tonality. And the two notes that sound good to me here are C and the note A. And since they're related, being C major is related to A minor, I know that I'm in one of those two keys. Now, if I put this a little deeper into the song, where I've got some bass notes ringing out, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to hear. So let me start at about bar 13 here. It sounds like that section of the tune is in A minor. And part of it, since I wrote it, I know it is also in C. Now, one of the reasons that I do that is because when I save the songs for later use, what I want to do is make sure that I've saved that information. So I'm going to go to one of the file browsers here. Let me go up to the top level. And I want to create a new folder here. So let me right click, and I'm going to choose Create Folder, and I'm going to call this Songs. And as I get these files prepared, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag them into this folder for later use. And since I'm going to be using these in different sets and projects later on, I am going to say copy, so I'll go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to rename this particular file. I'll leave the name of the song in there, but I'm also going to append some information about the tempo and the key of that. So I'll put in here 117 BPM, and I'll put in C major. And the reason I put that information there is that when I'm going to be putting a set together, if I'm using multiple songs here, if I'm going to be transitioning from one song to the other, it can be quite jarring if you go from a song that is in one key to a song that is in a really distantly related key. Now, the two that I've set up are in pretty closely related keys. So this first song is in C major, and this second song is in G major. And that differs by one accidental. C doesn't have any sharps or flats. G major has one sharp. And so you're going to find that if you move to keys that are within one accidental, you're going to be okay because they're very, very closely related. So if I was going to name this one, I'd go through the same process, by the way, and work out the warping and tempo and all the elements that I'm going to be working with this particular song. But when I'm ready to name it, I'll just drag that over into the folder as well, say copy, and in this case, this one was at about 120 BPM, and it's in G major. And that way, when I look in the list, I'll see these songs that are close in tempo show up next to each other, and I'll also be able to see the closely related keys. Now, another thing that you might be doing as part of preparing audio files is to create sections of the songs for use. So I'm going to copy the clip on this first track by selecting that and then holding down my Option key and dragging. And now what I can do is start to set loop points on this. So if I come down here and I drag out the loop brace on that track for the first 9 bars, which is the first part of the intro, I can set that point to loop. You'll also want to go into the sample box here and click on the loop button. And if I click and fire this off over here towards the end, we should hear that loop. Okay, and that's working pretty smoothly. Now once I've got that down, I can copy that again, holding down my Option key, and click and drag that. I've got a second copy. I'm going to go back to the first one, and I'm going to go Command R, that'd be Control R on a PC, so I can rename that, and I'll call that intro. And then I'll go down to the second clip, and I can move the brace over. And by the way, when I do this, I usually work in bar increments. So you can see that right now I'm not at that. So if I right-click in this area and I go into the grid, I can set that to 1 bar. So as I move things, they'll snap to 1 bar in length. Now I've got that loop set. Now it looks like this audio material is telling me that this is actually something that I might only want to be 4 bars long, because I can see a big difference in the waveform below. So I'll drag that over and snap that to bar 13. If I hold down Command and Shift or Control Shift on a PC, I can move the play end of that loop to that point as well. I'm going to zoom in. Let me just play the end of that by shift clicking up here, and I just want to hear that wrap around. Okay, that's nice and smooth. That's a big part of setting these sections of tunes to be able to trigger at a later point. You want to make sure that they really loop nicely. So in this case, I'm going to rename that one again, and I'm going to call that Intro B. So you'd go through both these songs and set your sections up. I've already done that over here on the 4th and 5th tracks. So let me scroll down there, and you can see that I have both of those songs set up. Now in this case, I have them on the same scene, and that's going to allow me to transition immediately from any part of one scene into the other to go into the other song. A lot of times you'll stagger them a bit. You won't actually put them next to each other like I've done here. Now the way that I can transition from one to the other is by opening up the crossfader. And if I click on this X button down here on the right of the master track, you'll see that I open up this bottom row along the mixer area and over here on the master track. Now I'm able to crossfade between 2 different audio files, and I can do that by putting a track on A or B. So I'll put this track on A, that track on B, and now I can grab this triangle here and I can move that right or left to move between output from those 2 tracks. If it's in the middle, you're going to hear a blend of both. So for instance, if I start this scene number 6 to play, we're hearing Linda's song. And you can hear how I'm transitioning from one song to the other. And that's working again because these 2 songs are in very closely related keys. So using audio clips in live performance requires careful preparation. Take your time as you create and warp clips. It will save you a lot of time later on.